What is going on, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video. So here we are sitting in front of my 1997 BMW E36 M3, and I thought it'd be a cool idea to go over my top 3 pros and cons of this chassis in case you're considering picking one up yourself. Now I want to go over some of the things to look out for, as well as some of the cool things that I think are worth noting on these cars. And so with that, let's hop into the video. All right, starting off with pro number 1, and that would be the styling of these cars. I think these E36s of the 90s are some of the coolest looking cars that came out of that era. I think just generally speaking, the 90s sports cars are some of the coolest cars that exist, period. But specifically the E36s, I think they're just the perfect balance between the really boxy cars of the 80s and the real round and bubbly cars of the 2000s and on. Now, obviously, the E30s that came before these cars are super boxy, and the E46s that came after these cars are really round. The fenders are really bubbly, and the roofline is really round as well. And so I think the E36 is the perfect combination of the two. Obviously, the headlights are rectangular, the grills are rectangular, the taillights are pretty much rectangular. And so, but the rest of the car is really sleek and, really aggressive looking, in my opinion. I think, with just a few subtle mods, I think if you lower these cars just a bit, and I think if you get like a front lip and maybe run the LTW wing, I think these cars just have such a unique presence on the road, even still to this day, that I thought it was worth mentioning. I think the styling of these cars are just so cool, and I think if you are at all a fan of these cars, you get what I'm talking about. So that's why that's pro number 1 when it comes to the E36 chassis. All right, moving on to pro number 2, and that would be how easy these cars are to maintain and to work on. Now, obviously, compared to pretty much any car nowadays, these cars are ridiculously simple. They're very mechanical, they're very analog. There's not a lot of electronics in these cars. There's not a whole lot of creature comforts. There's not a lot of modules that can, if one goes out, it takes out another system in a car, especially like the newer BMWs. And so not only that, but I think these cars are getting more popular. I think they're, the nostalgia factor of these cars are playing a big part. And I think not only that, but people are seeing the capabilities of these cars, even still compared to the cars that are out nowadays. And with that means, obviously, you have to keep them maintained. You have to keep them on the road if you want to drive them nowadays, which means more and more people are just generating information on how to keep these cars running, how to work on them yourself, and just how to keep them on the road, whether that be on the forums, whether that be on YouTube, and whether that be on maybe some Facebook groups. Either way, there's just a ridiculous amount of information out there on how to keep these cars running, how to work on these cars if you want to work on these cars. I think your average DIYer could probably keep this car maintained and running healthy pretty simply. Like, again, there's not a lot to these cars. They're very all the electronics are pretty much, 12 volt, just battery, power, and ground. Like, there's not a lot to diagnosing these cars. I think the hardest part about these cars is the OBD1 cars, the, pre-OBD2 cars. Those can be a little tricky to diagnose if you don't have the right tools. Those cars get smog differently. Those cars, if you really want to know if they're running healthy, you might need an exhaust gas analyzer to just know if, the car is running the way it's supposed to run. But other than that, the OBD2 cars, they're pretty easy, man. And all the electronics, like I said, are pretty, black and white, 12 volts, battery power and ground. They're very easy. And so because of that, that's why I would consider that pro number 2 when it comes to the E36 chassis. All right, moving on to pro number 3, and that would be how reliable these cars are. Now, I've had 4 of these E36s, and 2 of them, my first 2 E36s, were daily driver E36s. I daily drove them for probably like 4 or 5 years, and the only time I've ever been left stranded by these cars, one time was when I had a coolant leak and my car started to overheat. Thankfully, I was able to pull off to the side and park before I caused any major damage, but I replaced the part and the car was back up and running like nothing ever happened. And the second time I was ever left stranded was one morning I went out to one of my cars. I went to go start it and it wouldn't start, and it turned out that the fuel sending unit inside of the gas tank has a little filter on it, and it was clogged just from over the years of, the gas tank being run low and it picking up contaminants. But I went to my local junkyard, bought a used one and replaced it, and the car ran just fine after that. So yeah, man, these cars are super, super reliable. I don't think they take very much work to pretty much bulletproof these cars. I hear that term a lot used when it comes to the E36s, that these cars are bulletproof, you know? But yeah, man, people daily drive these cars, people track these cars, they autocross these cars, they drift these cars, and they just go through a lot of abuse and they just keep it going. And I think that these are really stout and really robust and really reliable cars if you put in just a little bit of work to keep them that way. So yeah, pro number 3 is that these cars are super, super, super reliable. All right, before we get to the cons, I do want to quickly ask that if you're enjoying any part of this video at all, that you consider subscribing to the channel. It lets YouTube and me know that people are interested in this type of content, and it makes videos like this possible. I appreciate it. Let's get back to the video. All right, so we talked about a few of the pros when it comes to the E36 chassis. I could genuinely sit here and talk about how good these cars pretty much all day, so it made making a list of cons kind of difficult. But there are a few things that I think are worth mentioning on these cars. So starting off with con number 1, that would be the fact that there are a few things on these cars that can cause catastrophic failures. Now, I'm going to talk about 3 specifically. I'm not going to go super in depth, otherwise this portion of the video would be like 10 minutes long. So if you're interested at all, I'm happy to answer questions in the comments, or if I get enough interest, I can make a dedicated video about it. But either way, starting off with the first item, these cars are notorious for having cooling system failures. From the factory, a lot of the cooling system components were made of plastic, and so over time they get brittle, they break, or they start to leak, and then all of a sudden you can have an overheating issue. And combine that with the fact that a lot of the motors that came in these cars are straight 6s, so they're long motors as opposed to like a V6, for example. If they overheat, they have a tendency to warp the head or the block of these engines, and so you might end up needing one or both of those. And so thankfully, as far as the 3 major failures that I'm going to talk about go, this is probably the easiest one to get ahead of. You know, just upgrade the water pump, put an aluminum thermostat housing, and maybe get an electric cooling fan, and you should be pretty much good to go. Now, moving on to the second major failure point of these cars, the front strut tower, the rear shock tower, and the rear subframe mounts can fail. They can just completely, they can crack or they can completely blow out. It's a pretty involved repair or preventative measure. Obviously, preventing it from happening is a lot easier, you know, to start with, you know, versus having to repair a failed strut mount or a shock mount or a, you know, rear subframe mount. But either way, just know that it does exist. If you're looking to pick one of these cars up, maybe, you know, try to see if you can see any cracking on the front strut tower or the rear shock tower. It'll be a lot harder to see underneath the car around the subframe, but just know that it's something that can happen on these cars, especially if you're going to drive them a little more aggressively than maybe a daily driver. If you plan to like track it, autocross it, or like drift it, it might be worth upgrading. The last major failure point on these cars is the oil pump nut in the engines. For some reason, they have a tendency to come loose over time, and if that happens, then you can lose oil pressure, or you will lose oil pressure and you'll blow your engine. And so to prevent that from happening, you would have to drop the oil pan, but you can weld that nut to the splines, or you can get a like securing wire. I'm sure that's not the official name for it, but if you look it up, you'll know what I'm talking about. But it basically locks the nut to the sprocket to where the nut can't back itself off. And so, yeah, those are the 3 major failure points on these cars. And so that's why that is con number 1 when it comes to the E36 chassis. All right, con number 1 was definitely the most gnarly of the 3 cons I'm going to talk about this car. So everything from here on out is definitely a lot less gnarly. So moving on to con number 2, and that would be just the fact that a lot of things on these cars are in need of repair. And that's not to be confused with the fact that these cars are easy to work on. I just mean that these cars, due to their age, there's a lot of things that aren't perfect anymore. Like, there's saggy headliners, the door panels are falling apart, sometimes the seats have rips in them, you know, there's a lot of like, these cars are not known for how good the plastic inside the car is, so there's squeaks and rattles and little ticks and stuff, and it's just to be expected with these cars. You can definitely get them to pristine condition, you can definitely get lower mileage examples or, you know, well taken care of examples, but be prepared to spend money on a car like that. But if you're hopping into one of these cars and expecting, you know, German luxury sports car, like, these cars you know, the youngest car you could buy nowadays is 24 years old at the time of making this video. They made them till 1999. It's 2023 now. And so the most recent car is at least 24 years old. And so if you are just picking one up, there's been at least 24 years of time that you are not involved in maintaining this car. And so there's a pretty good chance that door panels are falling apart. The headliner, like I said, is probably sagging. You might have a couple oil leaks. You know what I mean? There's going to be some creaks and stuff. It might need a suspension refresh, but like I mentioned in the last clip, there's not a lot of cons when it comes to these cars, so it's definitely not detrimental. I would not say that's a reason to not get one of these cars. If anything, I think it kind of makes the character of this car. I think, you know, just being a 90s car, I think it kind of makes the car what it is, man. Like, I don't know if you share this experience, but for me, I kind of enjoy like the squeaks and the rattles and the little whatever. Like, I don't drive this car because I want it to be the most comfortable, quiet ride. I drive this car because it's really analog. It's really nice. It's quick. It's fun. It's zippy. I like the way it handles. I like the way it feels. It's not about like the plastics and the way it looks and such, at least not for me. So that's con number 2. Nothing super crazy, but let's move on to con number 3. All right, I've already mentioned a few times about how it was kind of hard for me to come up with a cons list for the E36 platform, but this last con has more to do with just these cars nowadays rather than general E36 things, and it'll make sense in a second. But con number 3 has to do with the price to buy one of these cars in 2023. Now, I want to give you guys 2 examples to kind of really drive the point home. First example is this car is a 1997 E36 M3 clean title with about 204,000 miles, and I paid probably a little more than I wanted to pay for it. But 5 years ago, I picked up a 1999 clean title E36 M3 with about 135,000 miles for about a third of what I paid for this car. Now, skip ahead to 2 years ago, I managed to find a deal on a pretty cheap E90 M3, which, if you're unfamiliar, is 2 generations newer than this. It has the V8, 400 plus horsepower, whatever. But point is, I picked that car up. It was a 2008 E90 M3 with about 155,000 miles, clean title, for just over $16,000, which, if you're unfamiliar, is like a pretty insane deal for one of those cars. It did need a little bit of work, but being a professional mechanic, I was okay with doing the work, and I was happy to have bought the car. But point is, I bought that car for not much more than I bought this car, which is crazy to me, because to see how much car you can buy, like how much more car you can buy with just a little bit of money than one of these cars, it kind of blows my mind. And so if you're looking to buy one of these cars, just be prepared that they're pretty expensive. Like, don't be surprised that you're not really finding good deals on these cars anymore, because even base model cars, like non-M3 cars, I see people trying to sell them for more than my first E36 M3 was. And it's just kind of crazy, dude, because even like clapped cars, people are asking for like 5, 6, 7,000. People are putting like a couple of mods on them and thinking they're worth their weight in gold. And it's just, it blows my mind, man, that these cars have appreciated the way they have. But it's kind of understandable if you think about it. A lot of the manufacturers are talking about going electric, going hybrid. And so I think these, you know, nostalgic, older, just raw feeling analog cars, they're just getting more popular. Like, people want to get into them because they're not making cars like that anymore. So it's understandable that cars like this are getting more expensive. And unfortunately, the cars that are being made today that do still kind of feel like these cars, they're crazy expensive. You know, you could buy a Porsche GT3 and it's gonna feel raw, it's gonna feel good, it's gonna feel fast, but it's a Porsche GT3. Like, that's, you know, so much money, obviously. But so these cars are getting expensive, and so just be prepared for that. You might be waiting a little while for a good deal, but, you know, don't give up hope. I think they're worthwhile cars to get. I think they are worth the money. I think they're awesome cars, and I think if you get one, you're gonna be like stoked that you have bought one. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think you'd regret buying one of these cars unless you buy an absolute pile of trash car that needs thousands and thousands of dollars just to get it to drive normally. You know what I'm saying? Anything other than that, I think, is a worthwhile purchase. But spending more money on a car you want sucks. So that's why it's con number 3. All right, that was my top 3 pros and cons when it comes to the E36 chassis. Obviously, these are pretty subjective to, you know, what I've gone through, my experiences with this platform. You might have a different experience or different feelings about this platform for whoever's watching this, but yeah, man, I love these cars. I hope you got an idea for what to look forward to on these cars, or what to look out for if you're looking for one of these cars. I said it in the last clip, but I think these are awesome cars. I think they're amazing, and I think they're worthwhile cars to get. They're really, really fun, and they're only getting more popular. There's only less and less of them on the road every day as people crash them, beat them, you know, blow motors up or whatever. I always get notifications about new E36s ending up in the junkyard local to me. So pick one up if you want one. I don't think you'll regret it. I think you'll have an awesome time with this car. There's a lot you can do. There's a lot of unique things you could do to these cars. And so, yeah, man, if you made it through the video, I appreciate you checking it out. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think about these cars. If there's any pro or con that I didn't mention that maybe you feel I should have mentioned, or how you feel about these cars, I'd love to hear them. But with that, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.